I always thought of my paintings as memories of my life. My kids said, "Nobody wants this." When I signed the guardianship papers, thinking my son was helping me, he took everything. Not long after, I accidentally saw a poster with my painting on it, priced in the hundreds of thousands. I've held a paintbrush in my hand longer than I've held almost anything else in this life. Longer than my first husband's hand. Longer than the handle of a broom or a cooking spoon. I started in my 20s, sitting at a little oak desk I bought at a yard sale, with a box of second-hand paints that smelled faintly of turpentine and dust. Back then, I never thought of art as something for galleries or critics. To me, it was a quiet thing, a private thing, like kneeling down to pray or humming a hymn to yourself when no one else is around. I painted after supper, once the dishes were stacked in the drainer and the children were tucked in bed. Our old farmhouse had thin walls, so I'd work in the kitchen with just one lamp lit, careful not to make noise. Brush strokes on canvas soft as whispers. I remember one night in particular, rain tapping against the window, the smell of cornbread still lingering in the air, and me, bent over a canvas, trying to catch the memory of a sunrise I'd seen over the cornfields earlier that week. The colors, pale gold, soft rose, and that quiet lavender of the sky just before the sun fully breaks, felt like salvation on the canvas. Of course, no one else saw it that way. My children would come into the kitchen in the morning, see the easel still standing there, and laugh. "Mom, what is this even supposed to be?" My oldest son once said, tilting his head like he was examining a joke scribbled on the wall. "It looks like you let the cat run across it with paint on its paws." The others joined in, giggling, wagging their heads. I smiled like I always did, but inside a little sting would take hold. I told myself they were young. They didn't understand. And maybe I didn't either. I wasn't painting for them or for money or for the neighbors to admire. I painted for peace. My life was loud children's cries, bills piling on the counter, a husband working double shifts, the grind of dishes, laundry, and the endless tug of time. But when I painted, the world softened. Every canvas was a little diary, though I never wrote words in it. Some women keep journals. I kept landscapes and still lives, flowers that never wilted, skies that never turned gray. I painted the lilacs blooming in spring, my daughter's doll left under the apple tree, the shimmer of lake water when we'd take Sunday picnics. Each one held a memory sealed in color. Still, my children wouldn't let up. "Mom, nobody wants this," my daughter said one afternoon when she found me brushing blues across a canvas. She was in high school then, her hair sprayed stiff, bangs in her eyes. "You should just throw them out. Seriously, who would pay for this stuff? It's just scribbles." I remember setting the brush down, wiping my hands on a rag and saying softly, "Not everything in life has to be sold to be worth something." But truth be told, even I never thought of them as a legacy. I stacked the finished paintings in the storage room, row after row, leaning against the walls. When one room filled, I started using the attic. The canvases stood there like silent soldiers, forgotten until I had the urge to add another. Sometimes I'd pull one out on a quiet afternoon, dust it off and smile at the memory it carried. Then back it went into the shadows. The years went by. My husband passed. The children grew and moved out, busy with their own houses, their own lives. The farmhouse grew quiet, except for me and my brushes. I painted even more then. The colors kept me company when no one else did. One Thanksgiving, when the family came over, my youngest son wandered into the storage room and came back laughing, holding a canvas under his arm. "Mom, you could build a whole house out of these things. Why keep them? They're worthless." The others chuckled, nodding along, as though my years of work amounted to nothing more than clutter. I swallowed my pride, pressed my lips together, and said nothing. What would be the use? To them, my paintings were dust collectors. To me, they were air I breathed through them. I suppose that's why I never pushed them, never tried to show them to galleries or friends. It was easier to believe my children's words. These are only memories, not masterpieces. Scribbles, not treasures. So I went on living that way. Painting for myself, stacking the canvases in corners, tucking them behind boxes, convincing myself they were just for me. Just little brushstrokes worth nothing. And I believed it, sweetheart. I truly did. Until the day I discovered how wrong I was. It began with the cough. Just a dry tickle in the chest, nothing I thought twice about. But it didn't go away. By spring I was moving slower, the stairs left me breathless, and I had to sit down halfway through hanging laundry. I told myself it was just age, nothing to fuss over. But the children noticed. Or rather, my son did. He started stopping by more often. Not the quick, distracted visits where he'd peek in, grab something from the garage and rush back out. No, this was different. He came with bags of groceries, a cheerful voice, and that look in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was small. First it warmed me. I thought maybe illness had softened him, reminded him I was still his mother. "Mom," he said one Sunday morning, laying a hand on my shoulder as I coughed into a handkerchief. "You shouldn't be worrying about bills or chores right now. Let me help. Let me take care of things for you." Felt good, those words. 4 years I'd taken care of him. Scraped knees, late-night homework, the heartbreaks he thought would never heal. Now he wanted to take care of me. I let myself believe it. But then came the papers. He arrived one afternoon with a leather folder under his arm. I was sitting in the parlor, half-finished knitting in my lap, when he placed the folder gently on the table between us. His tone was soft, kind, rehearsed. "Mom, this is just something to ease your mind," he said. "It's called hereditary guardianship. It means if anything happens, I'll be able to handle the estate, the finances without you worrying. It's just protection." I blinked at the word. Guardianship. It sounded odd, like I was a child again in need of someone else to decide what was best. "I don't think I need that," I murmured, fiddling with the yarn in my lap. He smiled, patient as a Sunday school teacher. "It's really nothing, Mom. Just a formality. You'll still have control. It just makes things smoother if you're not feeling well. Please for me." I looked at him then, really looked. His eyes were steady, his suit neatly pressed, his tie the same deep blue he'd worn to prom all those years ago. He had that same pleading look he'd used when he wanted extra allowance or to stay out late. I was tired that day, the cough had worn me down, and the words for me tugged at my heart. So I signed. My hand trembled a little, but the pen scratched across the page, black ink binding me to something I didn't fully understand. When I looked up, his shoulders relaxed as if a weight had lifted. He pressed the papers back into the folder, snapped it shut, and gave me a kiss on the cheek. "You won't regret this, Mom," he said. For the next few weeks, he was sweeter than I'd ever known him to be. He brought flowers, ordered takeout so I wouldn't have to cook, even sat with me in the evenings watching the old shows I loved. It was as if I had my son back, the boy I raised, the boy who used to run into my arms after school. But there were little things, small shadows I didn't see clearly at the time. Phone calls he'd take in the other room. Whispers I wasn't meant to hear. A quick glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Something sharp in his eyes that didn't match the tenderness in his voice. One afternoon I asked him what exactly those papers meant, why they were necessary. He brushed it off with a laugh. "Mom, don't overthink it. It's just a safety net. I want you to rest easy." So I let it go. I told myself I was being silly, imagining trouble where there was none. After all, he was my son, my flesh and blood. Why wouldn't I trust him? It wasn't until later, much later, that I would understand. That folder, those signatures, my trust given too easily was the first blow. Not the kind that leaves bruises on the skin, but the kind that leaves cracks inside you, the kind that takes your breath away in ways no illness ever could. At the time, though, I only felt tired. Grateful for his help, touched by his visits. I didn't see the trap closing around me, not yet. I still remember the way the pen felt in my hand that day, cool, smooth, heavier than it should have been. I had no idea it was the weight of betrayal I was holding. The house was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet you notice after years of raising children in it. My son had come by early, saying he needed to check a few things. He walked through the rooms like he owned the place, his shoes clicking against the wood floors. I followed him as far as the kitchen, then settled at the table with my teacup, telling myself it was nice to have company, even if he was distracted. I must have dozed off because the sound of his voice woke me. At first I thought he was speaking to me, but then I realized he was on the phone. His voice was lower than usual, steady, deliberate. He stood in the hallway between the kitchen and the front door, his back to me. "It's all under control," he was saying. The words made my stomach stir. I sat still, the china cup warm in my hands, and listened. "The guardianship signed," he continued, his tone clipped, businesslike. "Yeah. Everything is legally mine to manage now. The paintings can be taken out any time." I froze. My fingers tightened around the teacup until I worried it might crack. "The paintings." There was a pause, the faint murmur of another voice on the other end. Then he said, "Don't worry. She won't notice. She thinks they're just old junk anyway. Been piling up in the storage room for years. I'll move them little by little. By the time she realizes, it'll be too late." My heart thudded in my chest. I wanted to stand up, step into the hallway, and demand to know what he meant. But my legs wouldn't move. I sat there, staring at the lace tablecloth, the steam from my tea curling into nothing. He laughed then. A small, sharp sound that I'd never heard from him before. "Trust me, it's better this way. She can't handle the stress. It's for her own good." I couldn't listen anymore. I pushed my chair back gently so it wouldn't scrape, set my cup down, and slipped into the back sitting room. From there I couldn't hear his words as clearly, but I could still catch the rise and fall of his voice, the rhythm of someone making promises. Promises that didn't sound like they were meant for me. After a while, the front door opened and closed. Silence settled again. I stood there in the sitting room, one hand pressed to my chest. The house felt different, like a stranger had been walking its halls. I went to the hallway, half expecting to find him still there, but it was empty. Just the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air. I leaned against the wall, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. My son, my boy who used to leave me dandelion bouquets on the windowsill, was talking about my paintings as though they were his to give away. As though the strokes I had poured my life into were just inventory to be cleared out. I told myself maybe I misunderstood. Maybe he was planning to move them for safekeeping, or to surprise me somehow. But deep down I knew. There had been a coldness in his voice, a finality that had nothing to do with kindness. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I kept glancing at the storage room door, half afraid it would already be empty. When evening came and the house grew dim, I finally worked up the courage to step inside. The canvases were still stacked where I'd left them. I touched one, running my fingers over the rough edge of the frame, as though to reassure myself it was real. Still, the words I'd overheard echoed in my head. "The paintings can be taken out any time." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the old clock tick. Every sound in the house seemed louder, the pipes groaning, the wind nudging the shutters. I thought of his voice, calm and certain, and the way he said, "It's all under control." Something had shifted. I didn't know the scale of it yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer safe in my own home. The boy I had raised, the one I trusted without hesitation, was planning something I couldn't yet name. And for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own child. The next morning, I carried a basket of laundry down the hall. It was an ordinary day, the kind that should have passed without incident. But something drew me to the storage room door. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps it was the memory of my son's voice on the phone, whispering about my paintings being taken out. I set the basket on the floor and opened the door. The smell hit me first: dust, turpentine, old wood. The scent of years of work, of nights spent alone with brush and canvas. I stepped inside, my slippers brushing against the floorboards. The room had always been crowded, stacks of canvases leaning against one another, frames rubbing shoulders like old friends. But that morning there was space. Empty space where there shouldn't have been. I stood still, my breath caught in my throat. I scanned the room once, then again, counting without meaning to. The tall canvas of the autumn field. The one with the scarecrow bent against the wind. It was gone. So was the painting of my daughter's dollhouse under the apple tree. And another one, the lilacs I painted after my husband passed. 3 of them missing. My hands trembled as I knelt down, moving aside the remaining stacks, hoping I had only misplaced them. But no. The gaps were clear, sharp, undeniable. My paintings had been taken. I felt a chill work its way down my back. By the time my son arrived that afternoon, I had rehearsed a dozen ways of asking him. But when I finally spoke, my voice came out smaller than I intended. "Some of the paintings are missing," I said as he set his briefcase on the counter. "Do you know anything about that?" He didn't even blink. He poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the sink and said casually, "Oh, those? I threw them out." The words hit me like ice water. "Threw them out?" He shrugged. "They were collecting dust, Mom. Mold was setting in. They weren't good for you to keep around. Honestly, I did you a favor." I stared at him, my mouth dry. I wanted to shout, to tell him those canvases were pieces of me, fragments of my life. But no sound came. Just silence, thick and heavy. He carried on as though it were nothing. "You don't need to thank me. I'll clean out more of that room soon. It's time you had some order around here." I pressed my hand against the counter to steady myself. The room tilted, the walls leaning closer. "Those were mine," I whispered. He looked at me, then really looked, his eyes cold in a way that made my chest ache. "They were trash, Mom. You've always said they didn't mean anything. Better to let them go." I couldn't speak. I only turned away, retreating into the quiet of the sitting room. My legs carried me, though they felt like stone. For the rest of that evening, I moved through the house like a ghost. I set the table, stirred soup on the stove, folded the laundry I had left in the hallway. But every motion felt hollow, as though something essential had been stolen from me. When he left, the slam of the door echoed like a closing cell. I went back to the storage room once more. The emptiness stared at me from the corner where the canvases had once leaned. I ran my hand along the wall, touching the faint outline of dust where a frame had stood. The absence was louder than any presence. That night, I sat in the dark with only a small lamp glowing beside me. My brush lay untouched on the table. I thought of those 3 paintings, where they were, who had touched them, whether they lay in some garbage heap as he claimed, or in someone else's hands. I had painted them with care. The autumn field carried the scent of burning leaves and the hush of late October evenings. The dollhouse was my daughter's childhood, caught in bright pinks and soft blues, a reminder of when her laughter filled the yard. The lilacs had been painted during a week I thought grief would crush me. Their purple blooms the only color in my gray world. Gone. Just like that. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to calm the storm inside me. But the chill of betrayal had already settled in. That was the first time I felt it. The deep, sharp cold that seeps into your bones when you realize your own flesh and blood has turned against you. It wasn't just a missing painting. It wasn't even 3 missing paintings. It was trust ripped out quietly without apology. And the silence of that room, the strange emptiness staring back at me, told me it was only the beginning. A month passed. I tried to push the missing canvases out of my mind, telling myself maybe he was right. Maybe they were nothing but clutter. Still, whenever I walked past the storage room, the empty spaces tugged at me like open wounds. Then one Saturday morning while out in town, I stopped at the little bakery on Main Street. The window smelled of cinnamon rolls and warm bread, but my eyes were drawn past the glass case, out toward the corkboard near the door. It was filled with the usual clutter: lost dog flyers, piano lessons, church rummage sales. But right in the center was a glossy poster that froze me in place. The poster showed a painting. My painting. It was the lilac canvas, the very one my son had told me he had thrown away. The soft purples, the strokes of green, the brush marks that only my hands could have made. There it was, displayed proudly as if it belonged to the world and not to me. At the bottom of the poster, bold letters read, "Spring auction featuring works by local artists. Starting bid, $120,000. My knees nearly gave out. I had to grab the counter to keep steady. I leaned closer, blinking, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, there was no mistake. I remembered every detail of that canvas: the corner where the paint had dried too thick, the faint smudge I had left when my hand shook with grief. There it was, polished in perfect lighting, being offered up like treasure. I felt dizzy. $120,000. I heard the bell above the bakery door jingle as someone walked in, but I couldn't move. I stared at that poster, my pulse quickening. My son's words echoed in my head. I threw them out. They were just moldy, worthless things. Worthless. Yet here it was, starting at a sum that would pay off someone's mortgage, enough to change a life. I left the bakery without buying a thing, clutching my coat tight as though the cold air might steady me. My feet carried me down the street, though I hardly knew where I was going. I ended up at the park, sitting on a bench with the poster image still burning in my mind. People strolled by with strollers, children tossed breadcrumbs at pigeons, and the whole world went on as usual. But inside me everything shifted. For years I had believed what my children told me, that my paintings were nothing, just scribbles and dust. I had never thought of them as valuable beyond the memories they carried for me. Yet now strangers were about to bid hundreds of thousands of dollars for one. I wanted to deny it, to believe maybe it was a mistake, that perhaps someone had painted something similar. But deep down I knew better. No one else could have painted that canvas. No one else knew the ache in those lilacs, the grief I had poured into those colors. That was mine. When I finally stood and began walking home, I felt a strange mix of heat and ice coursing through me. I thought of the other missing canvases. Were they, too, hanging in some gallery waiting for eager bidders? How many of my memories had already been stolen and sold behind my back? That evening I confronted my son. He was sitting in the parlor scrolling through his phone. "I saw a poster today," I began. My voice shook, but I kept going. "The auction in town. They had my lilac painting on it. The one you told me you threw away." His thumb froze mid-swipe. For a moment he didn't look at me. Then he gave a short laugh. "Mom, you must be mistaken. A lot of paintings look alike. Lilacs are common." I shook my head. "No. I know my own work. That was mine." He sighed, setting the phone aside. "Even if it was, what difference does it make? It's better this way. Someone else appreciates them. They were just taking up space here." I opened my mouth, but no words came. He looked at me with that calm, practiced smile, the one he used when closing deals or smoothing over clients. "You should be proud," he added, almost mockingly. "People finally see value in your art." I walked away before the tears came. In the kitchen, I braced myself against the counter, the same spot where I used to knead bread, where I had signed those guardianship papers. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the wind rattle the shutters, my mind replaying the image of that poster, the bold numbers beneath it. I didn't yet know how high the bidding would go. I didn't yet know how deep his betrayal truly reached. But already it felt as though my life had been stolen piece by piece, wrapped up in a glossy poster for strangers to fight over. The auction took place on a Thursday evening. I hadn't planned to follow it, but curiosity gnawed at me. That poster had planted something deep inside. A mix of dread and defiance. So I borrowed my neighbor's computer, telling her I needed to look up a recipe, and typed in the name of the auction house. There it was, bold and undeniable. Lot 27, untitled lilacs, oil on canvas. My canvas. I clicked through the photos, my breath shallow. They had photographed it in perfect light, the lilacs glowing with a richness I hadn't even known I'd captured. My handprint was there in every stroke, but my name was nowhere. Just private collection. The bidding had already started. I watched as numbers appeared, climbing higher and higher. 120,000 became 200. Then 3. By the time it passed 500,000, my hands were trembling so hard I had to grip the desk. Sold! The announcer's voice crackled through the live stream. For $1,800,000. The room in the video erupted with applause. Strangers in tailored suits and glittering dresses clinked glasses, as if they had just witnessed a miracle. I sat frozen, my heart pounding. My lilac painting, the one I had poured my grief into, the one my son had claimed he'd thrown into the trash, had sold for nearly $2 million. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the sob that rose up. It wasn't pride I felt. It wasn't even shock. It was something far darker. A hollow, twisting pain, like being gutted from the inside. He had taken it. My own child. He had stolen a part of me and turned it into profit. The applause on the computer faded as the screen went dark. I sat in silence, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the room. My eyes wandered to the corner of the kitchen where my brushes still stood in a chipped jar. They looked pitiful there, quiet witnesses to the betrayal. I thought of all the times he and the others had laughed at me. Scribbles, Mom. Worthless junk. Their words had cut me then, but this cut deeper. It wasn't just mockery anymore. It was robbery. I closed the computer and sat at the table for a long while. Outside, children rode bicycles up and down the street, their laughter carrying on the evening air. I used to picture my son like that, carefree, innocent. Now all I could see was the man who had smiled at me as he placed papers in front of me, the man who had told me it was just a formality. That night I couldn't bring myself to eat. I boiled water for tea, then poured it down the sink untouched. When I finally went to bed, the sheets felt heavy. I lay on my side staring at the wall, my chest aching with each breath. Sleep didn't come. Instead, images flooded me. The lilac canvas hanging in some stranger's home. The sound of applause as they claimed it. My son's voice smooth and calm. It's better this way. At some point in the night, I rose and went into the storage room. I turned on the single bulb that hung from the ceiling and looked at the remaining canvases. They stood in crooked stacks, leaning like tired old men. For the first time, I saw them not as clutter, not as private diaries of my days, but as prey. Each one was a target, waiting for his hand to snatch it away. I sat down on an old stool and pulled the nearest canvas into my lap. It was a small one, just a vase of tulips I had painted one spring when the children were still little. I ran my fingers over the paint, feeling the ridges of dried color. Tears blurred my vision. How many of these would vanish before I could stop him? How many memories would be sold off to strangers while I sat here helpless? The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had known. It wasn't just the paintings. It was trust, motherhood, blood. He had stolen not just canvases, but my very life's breath, and turned it into something I could never touch again. By dawn, I was still sitting in that room, clutching the tulip canvas like it was a child. My hands ached, my back stiff, but I couldn't let go. That morning, the world looked the same. The sun rose, the birds sang, but I was changed. I knew now beyond doubt that I had been robbed by my own flesh and blood. And that, sweetheart, is a knife to the heart no one ever expects to feel. After the auction, I stopped looking at my son the same way. I still brewed him coffee when he came by. I still set out the china cups and offered pie. But inside, something had broken. Every smile he gave me looked like a mask. Every pat on my shoulder felt like the touch of a stranger. I couldn't rest until I knew more. Where had the money gone? Who had bought my lilac painting? What other canvases were already out of my reach? Questions whirled in my head like crows circling a field. It was my neighbor, the same one who had lent me her computer, who helped me begin to untangle it. "Evelyn," she said softly one evening, "you know your son's name is listed on property records in Delaware?" The word Delaware sounded foreign on her lips. She pulled out a printout from her desk. She had gone looking herself, curious after I'd told her about the auction. There it was, in black and white, an LLC registered under his name. Address nowhere near here, linked to a bank I'd never heard of. I stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. The next week I began to notice little things. He had a new car, sleek, polished, nothing like the old sedan he used to drive. His wife wore a gold bracelet I knew hadn't come from the discount store downtown. And yet, whenever I asked about bills, he sighed loudly, as though money were always scarce. "Mom, everything costs a fortune these days," he said one afternoon, tapping on his phone as if he hadn't just brushed past the truth. "You don't understand the strain." But I did understand. I understood too well. It wasn't until I found the envelope on his desk that everything clicked. He had left it behind one day while fetching me groceries. I shouldn't have touched it, but my hands moved before I could stop them. Inside were papers, account statements, foreign banks with numbers I couldn't even fathom, figures in the millions. Every sale, every theft funneled away neatly into something called offshore holdings. My paintings were gone, and so was the money they had fetched. And in their place I had been left with silence, emptiness, and the echo of his lies. When he came back, I forced myself to act normal, to sit in my chair with a blanket across my knees. But I couldn't unsee those numbers. That night, I lay awake thinking of how carefully he had arranged it all. He had filed the guardianship papers so I would look incompetent, so no one would believe me if I tried to speak. He had whispered on the phone about control. He had taken the canvases piece by piece. And now I saw the whole picture. He had painted me as feeble, as incapable. A woman too frail to handle her own affairs. And with that brushstroke he had stripped me of my rights, my work, and my voice. I wanted to scream, to march into his house, slap those glossy bank statements on the table, and demand the truth, but I knew how it would play out. He would smile that practiced smile, shake his head gently and say, "Mom, you're confused. You must have misunderstood." That was the cruelest part of it all. He had arranged everything so that my words would sound like nonsense. To the world, I was already an old woman losing her grip. To the world, his version of the story would sound reasonable. So I said nothing. Not yet. Instead, I began to watch more closely. I noticed how often he disappeared on business trips. How his phone calls were cut short when I walked into the room. How his eyes flickered whenever I asked about the paintings. Each little detail was another brushstroke in the portrait of betrayal. One evening, as I sat on the porch, I heard him talking to his wife in the car before they came inside. His voice carried through the open window. "She won't figure it out," he said. "By the time she does, it won't matter. The accounts are locked. Everything's under my name now." My heart clenched so tightly I had to grip the armrest of the chair. That night, when I went to bed, I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the slow, steady beat of a heart that had been broken too many times. I told myself I had two choices: to fade quietly, letting him strip away everything, or to stand. The thought of standing terrified me, but the idea of doing nothing terrified me more. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, "He thinks I'm powerless. He thinks I'm a shadow. He has no idea who he's dealing with." And so, sweetheart, that was the night I began to plan. Not revenge, not anger. Just truth. I would find a way to bring the truth into the light. Because a mother may be painted as weak, but she remembers. She endures. And she does not let her life's work vanish into hidden accounts without a fight. The night I discovered the offshore accounts, I knew I couldn't stand alone anymore. My son had power, papers, and money on his side. What did I have? A failing body, a house full of silence, and the memory of colors on canvas. But I also had something he'd forgotten: friends. I hadn't seen most of them in decades. Life has a way of scattering people like autumn leaves. Exhibitions end, letters stop coming, and everyone gets lost in their own battles. Still, I remembered names, faces, and the smell of turpentine in studios filled with smoke and chatter. The first call I made was to Clara, an old friend from the art co-op we'd both joined in the late 60s. My hands trembled as I dialed her number, unsure if she'd even remember me. But when she answered, her voice carried the same warmth I recalled from those long nights in her cluttered apartment. "Evelyn? My word. I thought you'd vanished into the hills." She laughed. "I almost did," I whispered. "But Clara, I need help. My son, he's selling my paintings. He told me they were worthless, but he's auctioning them for millions. I don't know what to do." There was a silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath. "Bring me whatever you have. Letters, photos, anything. We'll prove they're yours." That night I dug through the attic, pulling out boxes I hadn't touched in years. There were yellowed exhibition catalogs, invitations to group shows, even letters from small-town gallerists who had once begged me to contribute work. I found photographs too, me in my 30s, hair tied back, standing beside my canvases with paint smudged on my apron. Each item felt like a lifeline, proof that I had existed as more than just a mother or a tired old woman. Proof that I had been an artist. The next morning I boarded a bus with the boxes at my feet. The ride felt endless, but when I stepped into Clara's little house in the city, it was like stepping back in time. Her walls were covered in paintings, some hers, some gifted by friends. The smell of oil paint still lingered in the air. She spread my papers out across her dining table, her sharp eyes scanning each one. "This," she said, tapping a catalog from 1974, "is gold. You were listed here. And here's a critic's review, see? They mention your impressionistic skies. That's unmistakable. Evelyn, you've got a case." Her certainty steadied me. Over the next weeks, Clara introduced me to others, some from the old co-op, some new faces who respected history. There was Martin, who still kept scrapbooks from every show he'd ever attended. He found my name in several programs, circled it with red ink, and handed them to me as though delivering treasure. And there was Louise, a retired gallerist who remembered my lilac painting specifically. "I saw it in your kitchen once," she said, eyes narrowing. "And now it's selling at auction? Outrageous. Write that down. My testimony will count." Piece by piece we built an archive. Stacks of paper, photographs, and personal accounts. It felt like I was gathering an army, not of soldiers but of memories. People who remembered the brushstrokes, the nights, the laughter in smoke-filled rooms. One evening, as we sat around Clara's dining table with teacups scattered among the papers, she looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen in years. "You know," she said, "he underestimated you. He thought you'd crumble. But you still have a name, Evelyn. And names carry weight." I nodded, though my throat tightened. For so long, I had believed my children when they told me my paintings were nothing but dust. But here were people who remembered otherwise, who treated my work like it mattered. That night, back in my small rented room near Clara's, I opened one of the boxes and pulled out an old self-portrait I'd painted in my 40s. The eyes stared back at me, steady, unafraid, alive. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for the paintings. I was fighting for her, the woman I had been, the woman my son had tried to erase. The more evidence we gathered, the clearer it became. My paintings weren't junk. They were heritage. Cultural pieces that carried weight, history, and value. My son had stolen more than canvases, he had stolen a legacy. By the end of that month, the boxes had doubled. We had signed statements, catalogs, photos, and reviews. Clara called in a favor from a lawyer she knew. an old friend who had once defended artists against fraud. When he looked at the stack of evidence, he gave a slow smile. "Evelyn," he said, "this is enough to bring a case. More than enough. Your son's clever, but not clever enough to bury this." For the first time in months, I felt something stronger than fear. It was resolve. That evening, as I walked back from the lawyer's office, the city lights shimmered on the pavement. I clutched the folder under my arm, my steps firmer than they had been in years. I whispered to myself, "He thought he had silenced me, but I still have a voice, and I will use it." The courthouse smelled of polish and dust, that mix of old wood and cold stone that makes every footstep echo. I clutched the folder of evidence so tightly my knuckles ached. Clara walked beside me, her arm looped through mine, steadying me as we climbed the marble stairs. Behind us, Martin and Louise followed, carrying their own boxes of papers. I wasn't alone anymore. My son was already there when I entered the courtroom. He sat at the front table, suit sharp, hair slicked back, his expression calm and confident. His wife sat behind him, her arms folded, eyes glinting like knives. He glanced at me only once, a fleeting look that carried both irritation and disbelief, as if he couldn't believe I dared to show up. The judge entered, papers shuffled, and the case began. "Your Honor," my lawyer began, "this case concerns the unlawful sale of paintings created by my client, Evelyn Harper. Works that were removed from her possession under the guise of guardianship and sold at auction for millions." My son's lawyer jumped in, smooth as butter. "With respect, Your Honor, Mrs. Harper is an elderly woman no longer capable of distinguishing fact from imagination. My client, her son, has been her legal guardian for nearly a year. He has acted in her best interest at all times." The word struck me like a slap. No longer capable. I wanted to shout, "I am sitting right here." But I stayed still, my lawyer placing a calming hand on my arm. Then came the evidence. One by one, Clara and the others brought forward catalogs, programs, and signed letters. Martin presented his scrapbooks, pages yellowed with time, my name circled in red ink. Louise stepped up, her voice steady as she recounted the first time she had seen my lilac painting. "These are not the works of a hobbyist," she told the judge. "They are part of our local artistic heritage. Mrs. Harper's paintings were reviewed, exhibited, and documented for decades." I sat straighter with every word. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, leaning on the wooden railing for balance. My hands trembled, but my voice, to my surprise, did not. "Your Honor," I said, "for 50 years I painted. Not for money, not for fame. I painted because it was the only way I knew to carry my life, my grief, and my joy. My son told me they were worthless. He told me no one would ever want them. I believed him. But he knew better. He took them, sold them, and left me with nothing but lies." For a moment, the courtroom was silent except for the scratching of the clerk's pen. Then came my son's turn. He stood smooth and commanding. "Your Honor," he said, "I love my mother. But she doesn't understand what she's saying. She's confused. Those paintings were clutter. I arranged for their sale to protect her from hoarding and from financial burden. If they fetched money, that only benefits her estate in the long run." He spoke like a man accustomed to winning, his tone dripping with patience, as though he were explaining something to a child. But the judge wasn't convinced. She leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "Mr. Harper, are you denying that these paintings were created by your mother?" He hesitated. For the first time that day, his composure cracked. Well, yes, she painted them, but they had no real value." The judge tapped the folder in front of her. "Yet we have here expert evaluations placing their worth in the tens of millions. Clearly, someone believed they had value." My son's face reddened. "That doesn't change the fact that she's incapable of managing them. She signed guardianship papers willingly." My lawyer stood. "Guardianship obtained under manipulation, Your Honor." She signed without understanding its purpose. And her son used it not for her protection, but for his own profit. The judge's eyes moved from him to me, lingering just a little longer. Not with pity but with something sterner. Respect. When the experts took the stand, their words sealed it. They spoke of brush technique, color theory, cultural significance. They called my work an essential piece of mid-century American Impressionism. Words I never dreamed I'd hear attached to my canvases. By the time they finished, my son was shifting in his chair, his jaw tight. The judge set down her pen and said, "Mrs. Harper, it seems your art has been gravely underestimated. Not by the world, but by those closest to you." I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the weight of her words. The decision wouldn't be final until later, but in that instant I felt the tide turn. I wasn't just an old woman in the courtroom anymore. I wasn't just a mother betrayed. I was an artist standing in the light of truth. As we left the courthouse, Clara squeezed my hand. "You did it, Evelyn. He doesn't get to erase you." But I only shook my head softly. It's not over yet. Not until the paintings come home. The ruling came on a gray morning. I sat in the same courthouse, my hands folded in my lap, heart pounding against my ribs. The judge's voice was even, steady, but her words felt like bells ringing across a silent valley. The guardianship is revoked. All works of art are to be returned to Mrs. Harper. Any profits from sales must be transferred back. These paintings are recognized as cultural property of significant value. For a moment I didn't move. I just stared at the polished wood of the bench, letting the words sink in. Returned. Revoked. Recognized. My son sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched, his eyes avoiding mine. He had lost. He knew it. And though part of me longed for him to turn, to meet my gaze and whisper some shred of apology, he didn't. He only gathered his papers, muttered to his lawyer, and walked out without a glance back. The emptiness he left behind in my chest wasn't victory. It was grief. Still, when the first canvas came home, wrapped carefully as though it had never been stolen, I wept. The lilacs leaned against my living room wall once more. Their purple blooms shimmering like old friends returned after a long journey. One by one, more canvases followed. The autumn fields, the tulips, the dollhouse under the apple tree. My house filled with color again. But I knew I couldn't keep them all. Some things are too big to belong only to one person. So I called the local museum, then the university gallery. "Take them," I said. "Let them live where people can see them. Let students learn from them. Let strangers find themselves in them." The curator's eyes lit up as though I'd handed them treasure. And in a way I had. I kept only a handful, pieces too bound to my heart to release. And then, with brushes I hadn't touched in months, I began one more. My last. It was not an easy painting. My hand shook, my back ached, and the canvas stared at me with a challenge. But slowly, stroke by stroke, she appeared. A woman lined with years, shoulders squared, eyes steady. Not young, not soft, but strong. Behind her, the faint silhouettes of empty chairs. The children who had once filled the house but were gone in more ways than one. In her hands, a single brush glowing with color. It was me. My final self-portrait. When it was done, I sat back and studied her. She looked nothing like the girl who had first picked up a brush. Nothing like the mother who believed her children's laughter was enough. She looked like someone who had lost everything, and yet in losing had found something deeper. Herself. I hung the painting in my bedroom, above the desk where I used to write letters that never got answers. It was the only one I refused to give away. Months later, when the museum hosted an exhibition of my work, people filled the rooms. Strangers leaned close to the canvases, whispering about color, light, emotion. Some cried. Some smiled. None of them knew the woman who had stood in her kitchen, mocked by her own children, believing her art was worth nothing. But I knew. And that was enough. I didn't paint again after the self-portrait. Not because I couldn't, but because I had said what needed to be said. My brush had spoken the truth. As I sit now, the house quiet, the lilacs safe on my wall, I think of legacy. My son thought legacy meant money, accounts, power. But legacy is memory. Legacy is color. Legacy is a woman who refused to vanish, even when her own blood tried to erase her. And that, dear, is what will live on long after I am gone. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.